This is the great thing. We were reflecting earlier, just sort of saying, we've seen the network grow, but we're also seeing the number of projects grow. So it's fantastic. And I hope you've also been seeing the glinting of Claire Mead. Claire Mead's research has been brilliant as well. So I've loved seeing that as well. And so I'm going to introduce Claire Mead to you. But just, I think one of the best things about Claire is the project that you do, which is called Joust Gal Pals. So please welcome Claire Mead to talk about arms and armoury.
Thank you so much. So thank you for inviting me to be part of this amazing programme. So since 2020, my practice around queer heritage, a range of queer projects like we all, as a curator and educator, has expanded from art history into looking at arms and armour and young adults, including the histories and representations of historical source women, trans and gender non-conforming people. But as many of us have experienced in the room, and as we've heard this morning, this has not been without the arsenal of challenges. And apologies in advance to people who do not like arms and armour puns, because that's literally that's not a phrase. So I want to start with a little bit of a provocation, which started with a chat with a lovely front of house team at the Wallace collection a few years ago when I was starting that process of trying to find gender perspectives, women and queer perspectives within the arms and armour collection, where a question about whether there were any traces of women in the collection, arms and armour, led to talks of a rumoured female armour in the collection, which led me to what was in fact an iron corset, which would be most likely in fact a medical device. It does slay, it is iconic, but did not wear it on the battlefield, so to be pleased. The corset itself is not labelled to reassure you as female armour, but nor was it labelled at all, interestingly, and it visually aligned quite strangely with the equestrian armour on display in rooms nearby. It was labelled such as this one, armour for family and horse. But this 15th century armour does hold clear provenance. It's castle in Germany that it's from, but lacks any type of information on its form of wear, or indeed their gender. So both of them, in very, very different ways, hold their own types of fantasies and assumptions around gender. One through fiction, a fictional woman's corset armour, which never existed. The other by assuming a male wearer by default. And despite the fact that a range of women, queer and trans historical figures are now known to have taken up arms to fight, these perspectives still struggle to reach the interpretation and display of arm collections. This is further reinforced by the notion and again assumption that these collections' core audiences are male and do not identify across the LGBTQI spectrum, with little to no space for queer and trans audiences to explore or see themselves in these displays. So the following case studies propose new ways to subvert these different assumptions by experimental research, interpretation, collaboration, and unexpected parallels across collections. And in doing so, it provides new challenges, hopefully, and solutions for dialogue with seemingly ironclad notion of a man at arms. So I wanted to start with the first case study of the exhibition Duel, or Duels, at the Musée d'Armée in Paris, analysing the duel's cultural relevance and enduring ritual across many cultures and its enduring legacy in fiction. The inclusion of women is refreshingly cemented throughout and not relegated to the dreaded, easily skippable side group of, marginalised people within, a given subject. And in fact, the very first tableau within the exhibition presents this iconic duel, one of many throughout the exhibition, in these different kind of mise en scène, that represents a 17th century duelist and opera singer, dueling nobleman Alfred de Gráinne. The use of men's historical costumes are known from the Paris Opera for their outfits, mirrors that we use dual identities, but also insufferable. But also gender non-conformity, reflecting the multiple instances in accounts of her story where she would have allegedly donned men's clothing, playing with conventions in more ways than one as an openly bisexual woman at the time. And this gender-defined portrayal aligns with a sketch of the Gautier's cross-dressing character of the Medicalisation, inspired by her novel, as it does with comic strip vignette Duel commissioned for the exhibition as part of the wider series. But it also contends with these very slippery, tricky things in terms of engaging with histories of women such as Julie de Vigny in the historic kind of love between fact and fiction. The erasure, fictionalization of these sources have led to lots of uncertainty about what can be considered real or not real within her story, and that poses further challenges in terms of including her and interpreting her as part of these exhibitions. And The theme of Dueling presented as performance when it comes to gender non-conforming women continues throughout the exhibition, with a focus on visual depictions of women fencers in public exhibitions. At times, women still couldn't compete on the same level as men, and with a second notable historical woman in the exhibition being Chevalier d'Eon, fencing against Chevalier de Saint-Georges in an 18th century public dueling exhibition. And like Saint-Georges, who was himself a black abolitionist and composer, D'Eon was an openly trans historical woman, was a subject of fascination, but also othering, and that is explored within the exhibition. The wider idea of gender as performance is explored throughout, with a particular focus on dissecting masculinity through the lens of privilege, power, and class, thanks to a wide range of visual culture and social history perspectives. And curators of the exhibition, Hélène Boutou-Rosé and Dominique Prévost, tell me that this is a conscious attempt to introduce more versatile interpretations into the arms and armour collection, where focus on the material culture of weapons has left often little room for reflection around who actually wielded them and their place within wider social, political, and cultural movements. Yes, the exhibition also, falls short of explicitly naming D'Eon as trans, and actually the genders have in the masculine, with masculine version of her name, and also fails to name Dominique as bisexual, despite quite obvious and intentional presentation as defining gender norms in the exhibition. And it took doing an exhibition with curators of the curators on YouTube and explicitly naming as such for that to be made more explicit. And the other kind of interesting thing within this exhibition is that fictional women actually outnumber the real historical women, queer and trans figures in terms of sword fighting and defined gender norms. With fantasies of a fencing woman on poster context that is only open to men, contrasting with an outfit for film reimagining the Three Musketeers as women in the upcoming film by feminist director Uda Benyamina. The display shows strides in an arms and armour museum that has traditionally had quite a conservative approach to these subjects in taking, expanding its approaches, but also the limitations of this approach without more external interventions from the community it seeks to speak about. Which brings me, in contrast to the more experimental community research-led approach of Beyond the Binary at Pitt Rivers Museum, which is both a temporary exhibition and a collection-wide object trail. Community partners undertook not only querying and questioning of the collections and displays at Pitt Rivers, but also an interrogation of wider binaries with the collection as they relate to power, self-representation, and gender. This also leads to the museum's own self-critical look at its colonial legacy, which is ongoing, which is still very visible in its arms and armour collection, which displays, classification of weaponry with, linear narrative going from so-called primitive weaponry to firearms, which mean often breaking down and criticising. The exhibition in its objects power section includes an ivory bracer, which was used to protect an archer's forearm, featuring Saint Sebastian. Community research Harriet Hardwick, which runs the label for this object, explores the fact that this depiction of the saint itself defines the usual representations of Saint Sebastian, either in his earliest versions as older and bearded, and in later versions from the Renaissance onwards as essentially posed young man that got associated with so many homoerotic reinterpretations. This one is bearded and homoerotic, tying into traditions and arguably the best of both worlds. I mean, that's just my interpretations. The interpretation of the label does only highlight its wider queer significance. Figures such as Wilde, Yukio Mishima, and Derek Jarman, but also ties into other explorations of the armour and masculinity in this space, such as this facial armour here. And this presents stark contrast with its original spot alongside other bracers depicting Saint Sebastian, but focusing on their craft and their youth. The same display presents Vita Sacra West biography of Joan of Arc, which looked at her from a queer lens relating to her own life, alongside an amulet of Joan of Arc, not Vita, although that would be amazing. Juxtaposed with photographs of male impersonators that we could label today as drag kings, and an excerpt of the pottery piece. But these traditional interpretations of Joan of Arc are, as just as much a queer and trans icon than the religious one, also create new connections with researcher Mara Gold, who wrote labels relating to Joan of Arc, highlighting witch as one of Joan's many facets and interpretations. And Mara defines this notion of queerness with witchcraft, linked to modern witch items in the same display, as well as with their object trailer intervention for the museum's Witch in a Bottle. And Sarah Joy Ford's In Mud book commission, incorporating this witch bottle alongside traditional warrior women with symbols such as the breeds and quilt, which you can see there next to it, further pushes these connections. And the object trail leads us to Gráinne and warrior princess figurine, which is delightful, and the Wonder Woman comics and the arms and armour display. The contrast that Mara Gold, again, was responsible for labels for these two objects, explores in their interpretation between their queer cult status and their original media display. It's named them as such, even though common is super obvious. Kiss Gabrielle and everything. Creates new tension with display and provocations within the wider trail of what was achieved and not achieved in terms of this queering and labelling. And this all brings us to the forgotten battle, gender in the Armitage exhibition, an object trail at the library, which you've already heard about this morning. So I might skip over a few things. And if Rob leaves in the middle of session, it's not because I throw the out of anything, it's because he has to go and get a train, allegedly. So in talking with Kit Hayham as co-lead of this project, they outlined for me the importance, which we've heard about this morning, so I won't elaborate too much about it, the collaborative approach that they took, which combined both, viewing the life cycle of weaponry in a collection beyond ownership into these kind of wider social and cultural connections, and embracing the unknown and clear gaps in the collection with something called prosopography. So that's a new one for the crosswords, new one for me, a kind of collective approach to queer perspectives in the absence of clearly traceable biographies. So commissioned research and interpretations of the selection of arms and armament collections were added to the museum's records and disseminated into the object trail, also given to the project's community volunteers, identifying as LGBTQ to form creators of sponsors. So Dion appeared again, this time clearly established as trans, by an inspiration of her presentation sword in the collection, engraved as her title of Knightess. And this is highlighted by creative responses to her use of sword imagery and like heraldry as tools for empowerment and self-representation. This study of Dion in itself was rooted in prior research led by Kit with trans history researcher and zine maker Luna Morgana in 2023. And creative responses made use of gender design objects like the ballad dagger, with its usage restricted to men, by both homoerotic reimaginings and defiant reclaiming of it as a ballad object in an imagined Barbie strap-on Hindu, reflecting in itself a 1348 scandal of women carrying daggers at tournament. But never mind the ballads. In its exploration, sorry, I had to do it. In its exploration of the collection, the exhibition and trail also explores the limitations of gender within this colonial context, and the museum has been embedded within, and acknowledges it as a major theme. This is explored by the new connections drawn between the Winchester model firearm and gender complexity of the Mina regiment, considering them as themselves as reborn as men rather than female soldiers and kind of transcending these binaries, but also the weapons linked to Yar Sintawa, showing the power both as queen and in opposing British colonial rule. European weaponry is queer, but also decentered in that way from Eurocentrism. It's exploring African relationships of gender and revolts against colonialism, with parallels formed with other non-European objects, such as the Sikh helmets engaging with Mai Bagel's legacy of Sikh warrior women. But the exhibition also demonstrates how pieces such as Henry VIII's tonlet armour, which would normally comfortably sit within this kind of Eurocentric, established male kind of status quo, can benefit from a queer perspective that deviates from this assumed binary definition of masculinity, by looking at gender and the Tudors through the lens of drag, but also playing with these different queer possibilities, design-wise, via its skirts. And the array of poetry that's presented throughout the exhibition also highlight the intentionally fragmented nature of these interpretations, and in many ways embracing not being able to ever really get the full picture, and that being, kind of the point. Do I have 2 minutes? 1 minute. It's around the case study. So, obviously you've been seeing different experimental, collaborative, and social history approaches, and not only focusing on individual stories, but how these stories, objects, and spark wider queer and trans reinterpretations and self-representation. We also have a challenge of white status quo around wider struggles into colonial legacies, race, and class. However, it's also blunting fantasies and inevitable parties of queer and trans potential. Male power fantasy help to uphold gender normative assumptions in arms and armour, while sources linked to real-life women, queer and trans warriors are fragmented, fictionalised, and half erased. But fantasy is also a powerful tool if used carefully for queer audiences to seek self-representation and explore their identity, and can be used critically and sensitively to spark new connections across arms and armour collections. So we start off with a look at assumptions around who inhabited these full suits of armour, and there is potential of queerly breaking down and poking fun at these assumptions, as I try to do currently, because Odilda Poisson, my evil, boisterous alter ego, museum mansplainer, and now Saul will help us. But for every here shown in the Museum of Art and History of Geneva Arms and Armour collection, but for every full suit of armour, there are also so many fragmented pieces that can never be assembled to form a whole, much like the information we have at our disposal around queer and trans histories. But embracing these fragments and their potential holds power, and so those creating our own mismatched suits of armour that only queer and trans bodies can embody and bring to life. Thanks.
For the next talk, I think there is a lovely connection with Claire in that I think Claire also did a video about queering Carly, and so we'll be able to perhaps recommend you go to have a look at a few videos. I think the opening question is is there such a thing as a queer aesthetic? I'm sure it's a question that we have asked ourselves occasionally when we look in the mirror, perhaps, but I think it's very rare that you might have 1.7 million views on the answer to that. So can I please ask you to welcome Lisa Armitage and Gráinne Dr. Gráinne to the day.
Hi, I'm Lucy. I'm and we're delighted to be here. I'm just going to send up the thing done. Hi, queer. So, what we're talking about today and sharing with you is a little bit of a journey that we've been on and we're currently on at the moment. Some content that we published back in 2022, the evaluation and the reflection and the work that we've done since then, and a project that we're currently working on and looking to the future. So it's a lot to fit in 15 minutes, but hopefully we'll get there. And I suppose what we're touching on as well is content that has been very successful and we're very proud of it, but actually it's about doing better. And that is what we're focusing on today. It's not resting on something already done. That we can skip. So to start us off, so back in 2022, we published a film series of 3 films, Not Seeing Straight, celebrating queer art and lives. And this was about opening up our collection at the National Galleries of Scotland. I don't know if we said that that's where we work at the National Galleries of Scotland. There we go. So some of the artists that we featured in this film series you can see on the screen there. So Rob Mapleflower, so as you can see, that the films were incredibly popular. They're published on our YouTube channel. They are sitting at 1,700,000 views, and they're still engaging huge amounts of viewers every single day, particularly the film that focuses on queer codes. And what we wanted to do is we weren't presenting answers. That's not the purpose of the films. What we're trying to do is open up our collections to queer artists, queer sitters, queer perspectives, but we're actually posing questions, such as what code symbols can we find in the history of queer art? What is the importance of highlighting queer joy, when all too often, as we know, the focus is on the negative, it's on the sad, it's on doom and gloom. So in amongst these art stories, of which of course there are many, what we're trying to do is express a strong sense of place, community, love and progress. And so we are incredibly proud of these films, and we're going to touch on that a little bit. But just another point is we do have 151,000 YouTube subscribers, which does make us one of the most engaged with museum gallery channels in the world. That sounds like a total boast. The reason I'm highlighting that is because we have a responsibility. We reach a huge number of people across the globe. A lot of the viewers are in America. We have a responsibility to in representation and sharing the correct stories and narratives that don't get shared. So that's why that's there. It's not a post. So this was, I'm going to pass over to Gráinne because this was actually quite a new way for us to work at NGS, and you're going to explain to me.
Okay. So yeah, so Lucy works in our digital team and I work in the learning team, and I mostly work with adult audiences to come to national galleries. So the strand that I'll be talking about is the queer strand of programming in the public programme for those adult audiences. I won't be touching on it or covering this, but there's also an amazing amount of work that my colleagues do with queer teens and young people that our outreach colleagues work in, but we're not talking about that today. Just assume and know that that's going on in parallel. Also, I just wanted to pick up on, like a lot of museums and galleries in 2020, we published and developed our commitments to equalities, and something that maybe just been sort of happening but hadn't been really sort of specified. And the one that I'm kind of really going to be riffing off is the one that says everyone should feel represented and see themselves reflected in our policy structures, our people, our audiences, our collection and programme. So good ideas, still loads of work to do. But I wanted to give you a little bit of background, and so just to show a selection of approaches that we've taken to presenting queer histories in the public programme. And I'll be deliberately looking at Scottish artists because we're from the National Galleries of Scotland. So it's fair to say that when I first started working there 2014, so 10 years ago, that queer histories were not high on the agenda of the organisation. And this is despite the fact that one of the first exhibitions that was on when I started working there with the two Roberts called Una McBride. And just for a little bit of background and context, they were a gay working class couple. They came from Ayrshire and they met on the very first day of art school in Glasgow in the 1930s. And then they later came down to England and joined the queer artist set in London and managed to upset everybody by their really outrageous behaviour. Matthew did a brilliant talk for us at the time. But the sexuality of artists and cities was very rarely mentioned in our public programmes, and in certain cases was actively ignored. There was a sort of shying away from that kind of research, and in some ways it was a kind of misguided sense of protecting reputations. And it's worth bearing in mind that in Scotland, homosexuality is not decriminalised until 1980, so it's really late. So that kind of instinct, albeit misguided, to protect is it ran deep in some cases. So for all kinds of reasons, this approach felt very wrong for the 21st century. Apart from anything else, it meant we were missing out on key pieces of information and interpretation, so many great stories as well. And as a national organisation, it is a real dereliction of our duty towards Scotland's queer communities. So this is outlined in legislation, but it's really important that it's part of our job. This is what we do. The slightly clunky phrase that we've used in the past, and maybe need to revise, is mainstreaming equalities. So in our public programmes, so that it's not just the work of the learning and outreach teams, community engagements, that it's exactly who we are and what we do. So in 2015 and 2016, I met with the LGBT Health Scotland 50+ age reference group, who were identified as a local existing adult group for members of the LGBT community in the 50+ age group age range. They were brilliant to meet with. They were elders of Edinburgh's queer community, long-standing community advocates and activists. And this particular group made a lot of sense for me, the adult programme coordinator, to meet with them, because the older age group aligns very neatly with the demographic that are many of our regular attendees at National Galleries. The most important message that came out of that consultation was that they wanted more talks and tours and interpretation, and that NGS, National Galleries of Scotland, represents LGBT issues, histories and experiences. So this was really useful feedback. And it gave me the kind of evidence that I needed internally to start those conversations. And on the basis of that, we pushed ahead with working with the Heroica Theatre Company, who are based in Hebden Bridge in Yorkshire. And they were developing a play about Scottish artist and lifelong lesbian Joan Erdley. The play premiered at National Galleries in 2016 and then toured across Scotland and Northern England in 2017. So Joan, again, just to give you a little bit of idea of practice, was a painter of children, landscapes, and the incredible monumental seascapes that she made in her beloved Aberdeenshire village of Cataline. She's a huge public figure in the Scottish art world. Her art has been taught in high schools in Scotland since the 1960s, so she's really well known and really well loved her artwork. There was a real hesitancy about speaking about sexuality, which she actually never hid in her lifetime. So heroic her really rigorously researched the play. There are incredible researchers and writers, and she cares. Going into all the archives, meeting with people who were still alive who knew Joan in her lifetime. And it kind of gave our audiences a way into Joan's inner life, allowing our audiences to very imaginatively engage with the work and also with her life and her experiences. This kind of interdisciplinary project it's a very generous way of working, or it's a very beneficial way of working, because it creates an empathy, a bridge of empathy between our audiences and our subjects, and also as well as very positively foregrounding the queer art narrative.
Hi, thanks very much. Yeah, so thanks for that, Gráinne. So part of our the work that we've done between publishing the Not Seeing Straight film series and today is we've taken a lot of time to pause and reflect and actually open up discussions with the queer voices in the National Galleries itself, but also within the city of Edinburgh in Scotland. So what you see on the screen here is a panel that we hosted in August 2022 with the wonderful Bob and Sigrid, who are the founders of the Lavender Men's Queer Book Archive. Anybody heard of them or met them? Amazing. So we had done, I'd done a blog with Bob and Sigrid and Kate Charlesworth, and also the wonderful Afton Moran, who was the voiceover of our queer film series. And this followed on from that. So this is the kind of bringing the digital world, my world, and the in-person world, Gráinne's world, together. So this followed on from the blog, and it was just a conversation to talk about the Queer Books Archive and the importance of it in the city of Edinburgh and the incredible community that Bob and Sigrid have built up to this day, and the connections they have made, and actually the impact they have made on queer people in Edinburgh is astonishing. So this is a really, really nice example of like bringing together and not falling into the trap of going, oh, we need to start everything from scratch. No, we don't. These communities already exist. They're already there. There are people who are connected on our doorstep. And so we were building up our own relationships and the conversations that we're having. So this was a really, really lovely event. And following on from that, that's all right, you can quickly. This is one of our wonderful audience members, Duncan, who left this quote for us. I don't know if you want to say anything about it, Gráinne, or just let people read it and take it in.
Yeah, I mean, it was just, there was lots of wonderful comments that came from the audience on that day, but this one was one that really resonated. And Duncan's somebody that we know really well at the National Galleries, and kind of really got a bit more emotional than he expected when he first started speaking, but it kind of speaks to the importance of queer spaces at that time when he came to Edinburgh in the 80s, but also now in that process of reflection and thinking back and creating heritage. So I just very briefly wanted to say, out with the sort of special projects like the play that we've outlined, we in the learning programme have also continued to programme queer themed talks and tours all year round. So not just, as we've heard already in some of the earlier presentations, not just in February and June, History Month or Pride Month, but fully acknowledging and understanding the benefits that come from magnifying around those months, and not to be underestimated. Since 2014, when I first started, we've done 21 live LGBT public programme learning events with roughly 2,000 attendees in person and live stream, because we live stream most of our talks now. And also combined views for the brilliant Queer Creatures Harryhausen's film series that Dan and Claire were contributors to, of over 1,000 views as well. So as Lucy said, that event with Lavender Menace was the first one that we kind of collaborated on. It felt like a really important organisation for us to platform and to foreground this emerging archive, albeit that it's based on 40 years of activity and activism, but it was really, again, important for us as a national organisation.
So looking back to Not Seen Straight, I realise we're covering quite a lot of content here. So what we want to do for the evaluators, so yes, the films are really, really popular. And I just want to say actually that there was a whole host of people who worked on those films. When I started the National Galleries, there was already a project team behind these films. So I just wanted to say that. There's a lot of people who contributed to this content. So what we wanted to do was basically pull the films apart. We wanted to put ourselves in that position. So we hosted a film screening of all 3 films and had a panel discussion with these 3 wonderful humans here. And it was in person, but it was also live streamed. And it was sold out, I think, wasn't it? So it was really useful because what we did was we watched the films together and we discussed what's missing. And simply put, it was there was a real lack of a broad representation of the queer community, namely Black people and people of colour and trans representation as well from the queer community. So that's been discussed. We also touched on language as well. There were, I know some of the people have said it today about the word queer, and that was really eye-opening and really interesting. What this event allowed us to do was really reflect and think, where are we going next with our content, and where are the areas that we really need to address and focus on. So that is where we are leading into getting closer to the how queer content. But I'm taking it straight from us. These quotes are a sort of combination of some comments that people left on our YouTube channel, some people who came to the in-person events. The top 3 are really positive and, of course, incredibly important. But the one that we're focusing on is what's missing and, you know, addressing those, because obviously that's incredibly important. We want to make sure that we have representation that we do. So
1 minute.
1 minute, oh my goodness me. Okay, pretty quickly, what we've done as well is internally we've really looked at the organisation, because you can't think about the audiences until you really think about your internal structure as well. So last year I founded the Queer Colleague Network at NGS, and so we do regular online content on our webpage, which is written by a whole host of colleagues, which is fantastic. So how queer, which is the project and the content we're working on at the moment, what's important to us? Representation and intersectionality, that's up there. That is a key focus, and we're absolutely not going to deviate from that or cut corners. If we can't do it properly, we're not going to do it at all. Representation in front of and behind the camera. So there's a project team that I lead, and I am queer, and the project team is made up of queer and non-queer colleagues. We've also got the QCN, the Queer Colleague Network, acting as consultants. So there's always the queer voice centred at every single stage of the project. And also asking that, what is our role as an organisation? And it's addressing that. I think we've probably all heard it. It's like, oh, why are you still talking about queer stories? Isn't that, it's all good now? It's like, well, no, we all know it's not, and we need to keep pushing back against that false assumption. So we're in a really exciting place where we're thinking about external voices, so relationships with people that we've already built up, but finding new ones, building relationships, exploring artists in the collection that haven't been explored, or that part of their identity has never been looked at, and some sitters have just come into the collections of Shuti Gatwa. And exploring some of these questions as well. I think it was touched on it earlier. It's like, well, what does it mean as an artist to try and interpret an identity through one person? And conversely, what is it like for somebody who's sitting as a sitter, as a queer person, and they're kind of representing something that's bigger than them as an individual? What are the pressures? What are the pros and cons of that? It's a really interesting sort of balance, actually. And then also the viewer, what does it mean to see yourself represented or not represented in the building? So just to finish, we're talking about visual content, which, you know, whatever, it's best to see it. So this is just a very, very short clip of some of our queer films and some of the queer contributors that we've worked with, because we're trying to, yes, queer people come in and talk about queer things, but also come in and talk about your practice and non-queer things as well. So you'll see the wonderful Amanda Thompson and Peter McQueen in there as well. So that's all from us, I think. So thank you very much.
It is good.
So, a variety of visual and linguistic codes can be seen throughout history, hinting at queer experiences and inner lives. But is there also a broader visual language that runs through history? Is there such thing as a queer aesthetic?
It's hard to sort of say what a queer aesthetic is without stereotyping someone, I think.
There isn't any one experience.
Queerness is something that's difficult to describe.
It's multitudinous. There are lots of voices with different lived experiences and different opinions trying to be expressed.
Aesthetics change with time.
We are every colour in the spectrum.
In order to care for something, you have to notice it. So what are the ways that we can bring things to people's attention to start to notice? You know, it can be, I think it can be as simple as like the act of walking. You know, like how important is the act of walking? I think that we can easily take the ability to walk and to go places and to access places. We can take it for granted.
I was drawn to this one because it's just such a majestic beauty. It's a perfect Highland scene. And I don't know if it really is an actual existing place. I think he's based it on places that are very similar to that, but I just think it's so aptly named, you know, the wandering shadows, the light passing through the glen, and it's your classic Scottish Highland scene.
Artists have also used their voice to push back against love that society has deemed illegitimate.
Memorial to Marriage by Patricia Cronin features two women, wives, partners, lovers, who are in their marriage bed asleep. So she made the piece in the early 2000s. So this was made at a time before marriage equality. It was made at a time when those kind of legal recognitions for same-sex relationships weren't in place.
The next duo work at the Royal College of Physicians, so I got that in. It's fun reading your bios. It's almost like a bit of a game. Katie Birkwood, Rare Books Librarian, 50,000 books dating from the 15th century. Felix Lancashire, 80,000 items, and dating from the 13th century. Please, a big round of applause for our next two speakers.
Hey, thank you very much for having us. Just to do visual descriptions for anyone who needs them. I'm shortish, dumpyish, white woman with short dark hair, glasses, and a silly badge I made at lunchtime. And I'm going to hand over to Felix.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Felix. I am a 41-year-old white man in a flowery jumper and a Crumpet Felix badge that I made at lunchtime. Today, Katie and I will talk about using queer heritage as a vehicle for discussing queer liberation and how this could be served by moving beyond representation to a broader class and gender-based analysis. Today, the Royal College of Physicians has the stated aim of improving health and healthcare for all, setting standards in 33 medical specialties. The ostensible reason for our establishment in 1518 was to make sure that doctors were properly qualified, as before that time, doctors in England did not need any specific documentation to practice. However, whatever the motivations of individuals involved may have been, the reality is that the RCP was set up as an instrument of class and gender-based power. And I should have said, sorry, just a content warning that our talk today will touch on queerphobia in multiple forms, as well as sexual violence and medical malpractice. So in 1511, a law was passed forbidding women from practicing medicine. And when the RCP was founded 7 years later, one of its primary roles was enforcing this law. At the same time, you now had to be relatively wealthy to practice, as you had to have been to Oxbridge and you had to pay to take the RCP exams. And while there was no rule saying you had to be an English national, we certainly made it more difficult for those who weren't. So England went in a few short years from a place where a doctor could be anyone to a place where a doctor had to be a wealthy white man. The oppression of women serves to monopolise economic power for men, and the oppression of queer people stems from the oppression of women. If you're going to award or withhold medical licenses on the basis of an artificial gender binary, then that doesn't leave much room for people who don't fit into that narrow worldview. The few people it does leave some room for are those who pose no threat to the overall economic power structure. We know of one woman in the 16th century whom the RCP did allow to practice. Alice Levers was in the privileged position of being friends with the Queen, and the RCP, acting in tandem with the state, agreed to turn a blind eye in her case. But the RCP has always acted to suppress working class women. In 1897, we lobbied to reinstate police powers to detain any woman they suspected of being a prostitute and force her to undergo an invasive medical exam. Regarding abortion, the RCP always intervened in the interests of doctors, not patients. In 1885, when one of its members was found guilty of performing virginity tests on young girls for no medical reason and without their guardian's consent, he received a slap on the wrist from the college, but was allowed to continue to practice. And this culture of positions backed by institutions doing what they liked with the bodies of the poor was well established. These anatomical tables from our collection feature real human remains. We don't know anything about the 4 people they represent, except that they lived in or passed through the Republic of Venice in the 1650s, and that they would have come from the most oppressed communities. They may have been poor immigrants, they may have been homeless, they may have been prisoners, they may have been hospital patients who died and whose families couldn't afford to pay for a funeral, or possibly whose families had rejected them. Today, queer people are disproportionately likely to experience homelessness and criminalisation, and the same was undoubtedly true in the 17th century. Whoever these people were, the state authorised for their bodies without their consent to be dissected and used as teaching tools for predominantly wealthy medical students at the University of Padua. The physician who probably dissected their bodies was John Finch. He worked in Italy as an anatomist, and the tables were later discovered amongst his possessions. Finch came from a politically powerful family. He happened to be gay and was in a lifelong relationship with Thomas Baines, another wealthy Cambridge graduate. Happily for them, they seem to have lived relatively openly as a couple. They were buried together, and in a document in our archives, Finch's godson writes very matter-of-factly about their relationship. As liberal heritage professionals, we've celebrated this 17th century same-sex relationship. But what does this story really tell us? We have a system where, on one hand, we have privileged doctors empowered to add to their wealth through the desecration of poor people's bodies, and on the other, we have those from the most systemically dispossessed groups, who would have included a disproportionate number of queer people, of global majority people, of neurodivergent people. What we have here is not a story of queer liberation, but of the ongoing oppression of queer people alongside the wider mass of the working class. Let's look now at a document that gives a rare glimpse into the life of a working class woman who was persecuted for not fitting into the artificial gender binary, and that illustrates the role of healthcare professionals in defining and controlling such quote-unquote deviance. In 1830, surgeon John Lavies wrote these notes about a 17-year-old who might today describe herself as intersex and whom Lavies describes as hermaphrodite. Lavies uses he, him pronouns for this person, but also says she was raised as female and worked as a household servant in a female gendered role. There's no evidence she identified as male or non-binary, so I'm using she, her pronouns. We don't know anything about this person really more than what I've already said. Lavies interrogates her about her sexuality and obscurely links her saying she likes the society of men with the circumstances that brought her under his care. This might imply she had an experience, consensual or non-consensual, with a man and was subsequently outed as intersex. I assume she was fired from her job, as Lavies says she worked up to the period of coming under his observation. There's no suggestion of any medical reason why she's being subjected to Lavies' examination. She's being used purely as an object of curiosity. As so often, we have a health professional enabled by the power structures in place to use a working class person's body for personal gain. And by insisting on defining her in relation to an artificial heteronormative binary, he is serving these power structures that keep wealthy, white, straight, cis men at the top and everyone else under some degree of subjugation. This young woman is oppressed for being intersex, and she's completely powerless in the face of that oppression because of her class position. We don't know what happened to her after this, but we know that exclusion from the formal economy is what drives a lot of LGBTQ plus people into informal work, such as sex work, and this relates to what Katie is going to talk about next.
I don't think that really means anything I need to worry about and see. The 19th century saw various famous legal cases exemplifying the establishment concern of policing sexual activity. This links to what was being said earlier about the rise of the idea of the individual and of desires to police sexual identities and activities. One such was the very famous 1871 trial of Fanny and Stella, two people arrested in London for the allegedly criminal and un-English activities of cross-dressing and soliciting sex. Both sides of the legal case used medical testimony to attempt to prove or disprove that, quote, unnatural intercourse, i.e. anal sex, had taken place. And the case was a cause for comment in the medical journal The Lancet, as well as many other places. Alfred Swain Taylor, a fellow of the Royal College of Physicians, often described as the, quote, father of forensic medicine, was called for the defence in this case and testified that he had seen no evidence of such unnatural behaviour. Taylor was the author of the standard textbook on what was then known as medical jurisprudence, of which several copies are found in the RCP library. They're part of my 50,000 books. A short section of the book concerns, quote, unnatural offences, and a much greater part of it lays out the medical evidence required to enforce state control of systems of property and power based on women's oppression, covering the topics of pregnancy, concealed birth, abortion, the legitimacy of children and paternity. A lot of it is about inheritance, basically. Taylor's book conflated consensual sexual activities between men with non-consensual consensual sexual violence. But he also took the contradictory and victim-blaming position that, and I quote, unless the person is in a state of insensibility, it is not possible to conceive that the offence of anal sex should be perpetrated on an adult of either sex against his or her will. In this respect, offences against the person, anal rape, take a backseat compared to offences against the state and public morals, consensual sexual activity deemed unnatural. My next example leaps 100 years forward, but the theme of victim blaming certainly remains. I just feel at this point that I ought to say, like, we wrote this and we knew it was going to be heavy stuff, but there's always, we've given talks on some of this material as well, and you always get to a point halfway through and you're like, God, this really is heavy stuff. And I'm sorry, but we do have a point for talking about it. Perhaps the one place you might expect to find 20th century queer history intersecting with 20th century medical history is throughout the course of especially the early years of the HIV/AIDS pandemic. But there is very little in the RCP archives of the 1980s relating to AIDS, as you can see from this catalogue search here. The RCP as a body did not show any official interest until almost 6 years after the first case of AIDS was described in Britain, and 3 years after the identification of the HIV, immunodeficiency virus. I won't say HIV virus because that's 2 B's, no good. The earliest mention of AIDS in the RCP Council minutes is June 1987, stating that there was a general consensus that training in AIDS should not be included in higher medical training, although the college would, I think somewhat grudgingly, provide specialist 1-week courses for district AIDS officers. The limited internal discussions in the following years, as documented in our absence of archives, centred on the ethics of confidentiality relating to infected healthcare workers, with concerns often expressed about the psychological harm caused to patients if there were even a suggestion that they might be HIV positive, and potential harm caused to physicians if their HIV positive status were notified to their patients. Discussions of treatment paths, preventative action, public health messaging, or how to diminish the stigma and discrimination they were worried about people facing do not feature. Of course, while the RCP acted with indifference, the government was actively exploiting the epidemic to stoke fear and division in society. By 1993, the Department of Health was pushing for the contacting of patients who had been in contact with HIV-positive healthcare workers so that they could be tested. The RCP, to its credit, I guess, pointed out that there had never been a single recorded case anywhere in the world of someone contracting HIV from a healthcare worker in a clinical setting, and that receiving a letter like this out of the blue would only serve to cause anxiety for the patient, as well as being a breach of the healthcare worker's confidentiality. However, again, there was no proactive suggestion of means of improving the climate of fear and secrecy around HIV status within medicine and across the populace, action which definitely would have acted to improve people's health and lives. And this is the suggested letter that should have been sent out to patients that the RCP opposed. So this analytical and critical approach to really quite difficult and upsetting history has been encouraging us to apply this approach as well to contemporary and near contemporary actions or lack of actions. For our part, as the Archive, Heritage Library and Museum team within the RCP, observing the paucity of historical collecting relating to HIV and AIDS has inspired a forthcoming collecting project in the subject area, addressing it from both a queer history and a broader medical history perspective. It also demands of us that we apply a similar critical eye to current inactivity on the part of our employers and the wider medical community. So in recent years, we've been observing that the college, whose mission statement, as we've heard, is better health and healthcare for everyone, makes occasional forays into offering advice to physicians about LGBT healthcare that do little to acknowledge all-encompassing structural barriers in housing, employment, mental and physical health and other factors faced by queer populations, and even less to create any change beyond the simplest and most prosaic, albeit often necessary advice, such as to ask patients what pronouns they use, to make sure you have the right name for them on file, and don't presume that all sex is man, woman, penis and vagina. There we go. Particularly in the viciously attacked field of trans healthcare, the RCP has remained characteristically quiet, a position which supports the unequal and indeed dangerously limited and even more so indeed declining status quo of trans healthcare provision. It has been commissioned by the NHS to provide professional certificates for clinicians working in adult gender identity healthcare, but has made no statements about what top quality gender identity services would look like and to whom they would be available. Indeed, in an expression of its frankly idealisation of formalised process over real-world personal experiences, it has invited none other than Hilary Cass to be the keynote speaker at a senior leaders event on helping resolve complex challenges in clinical medicine. You didn't hear that from me, but it is on the website. So to conclude, faced with these varying and ongoing examples of oppression over the centuries, Felix and I became dissatisfied with our initial kind of stamp collecting approach to doing queer history and heritage in the RCP collections. It was all very well identifying, documenting and interpreting the stories of queer people and themes in the objects, books and documents through the kind of lens of, oh look, there were queer things in the past. An initial difficulty that so many of our sources and examples were not the sort of inspiring stories of individual triumph against societal prejudice that we might hope for when looking for queer history, has in fact become the inspiration and driving force for this sort of analysis-based approach to the available sources, which, though heavy-going, hard work and upsetting, we hope is more engaging and ultimately more potentially liberational for the queers of today and tomorrow, because it forces us to address the real reasons for the position that people find themselves in the past and now, and will continue to in the future. And it seems to have gone down well with our audiences because we have had some nice comments like that. Thank you very much.